Hello, my name is Bjørn Hansen, and this is my TED Talk. People have always had an inclination to stay the course, and that's to say that we have an inclination to resist change. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, I can agree as much as the next person that having a change of plan can be an uncertain experience. It can be uncomfortable and generally unpleasant. However, on the other hand, we do live in a world with things that clearly didn't exist from the beginning. Things such as civil rights and infrastructure. And that's because we've actually collectively agreed to change over many different iterations. And the general rule in history is that at each junction, there's always going to be a group of people opposing making another change. Because as I've said, doing so can be uncertain, uncomfortable, and generally unpleasant. It's a cycle that goes on, and it's a tradition that continues until this very day. If you examine your listening habits, you would find that we actively dismiss and denounce opinions that we don't agree with, even if we don't necessarily understand what they mean or where they're coming from. And that's incredibly unfortunate, because we owe our entire identities, our entire cultures to this incredibly powerful ability to be able to share our opinions and share our experiences. By stamping some of those voices out, even if they're the ones that you don't agree with, you're stamping out a part of your heritage. But more importantly, you're stamping out progress. If I still haven't sold you on the importance of this subject, please allow me to sway your opinion with the following very handy quote that I found. Our voices are the one instrument that can declare war, say I love you, and everything in between. That's powerful, very powerful. Our voices are very powerful and they're important. Therefore, we should be able to wield this tool freely and without fear of being persecuted for doing so. At this point, you may be wondering what the point of this talk is. After all, we've made huge leaps and bounds in the field of sharing our voices. With the advent of telecommunications and the increasing popularity of social media, you may think that society has never been freer until this very day. But alas, that's only something you think. And sometimes you think things wrong, in which case if you were thinking that, then you thought wrong. I'm going to show you why that is. A study by the Pew Research Center shows that 40% of millennials believe that the government should have the power to restrict certain kinds of offensive speech. Compare this to only 12% of the silent generation. The terrifying implication is that our grandparents 70 years ago, 80 years ago, have freer speech than we do today, no matter how many new ways of sharing are available to us. Still, some of you may be thinking that it's okay to restrict offensive speech, because after all, offense has no place in a perfect world. In a perfect world, nobody would be offended. And that isn't necessarily true, and here's the thing. Imagine if I had written a song denouncing all major religion and blaming them for all the world's problems. The lyrics are the following. Imagine there's no religion. Imagine all the people living life in peace. I probably would have offended quite a few people. Nevertheless, Imagine by John Lennon is still regarded as one of the greatest pieces of music ever recorded. Now, I'd like you to imagine that it's 150 years ago, and I was giving you this speech. And I had come up to you and told you that I think that everyone should be able to vote for who their leaders are, even women. I would have been described as offensive. I would have been denounced, shouted at, and eventually refused a platform, my bad. That was the experience of Susan B. Anthony, who in 1872 was arrested in her hometown of Rochester, New York, for casting a vote. Now I'd like you to imagine that it's 70 years ago, and I had come up to you and told you that I think that we should not segregate people based on the color of their skin. We should have the same schools, facilities, and the same water fountains. I would have been described as offensive. I would have been hated by some people. Of course, That was the life of Martin Luther King Jr., who was arrested in Birmingham for staging a peaceful protest against racial segregation. Now I'd like you to imagine that it's 50 years ago, and I had the gall to come up here and tell you that I think that a man should be allowed to have sex with another man. I would also like to run for political office. I would have been described as pretty offensive. I also would have been Harvey Milk. Sadly, I also would have been assassinated in 1972, San Francisco. These are the faces of offense. They're the faces of offense in their times, but in our times, we look up to them as paragons of positive social change. It's because of them that we're able to get along regardless of color, sex, and sexuality. But I digress. Those issues have already been resolved. We don't need to bother with them anymore. In modern times, there are thousands more issues deserving of attention and perhaps even change. Attention and change that can be brought on by the few people who are brave enough to do so. The long and short of it is that causing offense is paramount to progress. And I think that I've proven to a reasonable extent that causing offense is good. By suppressing the few people who are brave enough to speak out in what they believe in for a better world, how are we ever meant to achieve that true utopia that we've sought after for so long? Fellow students, teachers, faculty members, parents, my fellow people, the world is far from perfect. That much I can tell you is true. But we can all take a step towards that perfect world just by listening to those voices of dissidence, in addition to the ones that we already agree with. I know it sounds insane, but it is possible, and it's the least we can do to contribute to bettering ourselves as a whole. Stop denouncing them, and stop dismissing them before they've had a chance to finish speaking. We should all try to understand the many different diverse perspectives held by people from all cultures and all backgrounds. If we do this, we'll make progress, and eventually, we'll create a more accepting, tolerant, and peaceful society. Thank you.